Seam lines are one of the most common artifacts in 3D printing. Even when a print comes out perfectly, a visible seam can make the surface look unfinished. In this video, we'll look at practical ways to hide seam lines in Bambu Studio, using the right placement strategies and a few advanced quality settings. A seam is the point where each printed layer begins and ends. On smooth surfaces, this often appears as a vertical line, or a series of small bumps running up the model. Once you understand where seams form, you can begin controlling where they appear. The first step to hiding seams is choosing the right seam placement strategy, based on the geometry of your model. Nearest seam placement prioritizes nearby edges and corners. For mechanical parts, this often hides the seam naturally, because corners already break the surface of the model. Aligned picks the point that is closest to the start point of the previous layer. So each new layer starts exactly where the last one started, which you can move to a less visible side by rotating the model or using seam painting. Seam painting gives you direct control over where seams are placed on your model. If automatic seam placement doesn't give you the result you want, seam painting allows you to manually define seam regions on the model surface. For a clean and consistent seam line, you can enable vertical mode in the seam painting tool. This allows you to draw a perfectly straight seam path with a single stroke from top to bottom without needing multiple passes. Seams are still part of the printing process, but with seam painting, you decide where they belong. For display models such as figurines or decorative objects, the back option places seams relative to the viewing direction. By rotating the model in the viewport, the seam can be positioned on the least visible side. On organic or highly textured surfaces, random seam placement can often produce a cleaner result. Instead of forming one continuous seam line, seams are scattered across the surface, where they blend naturally into the texture. Once seam placement is under control, a few advanced settings can further improve seam quality. One important setting is smooth speed discontinuity. This gradually adjusts print speed around corners and seam transitions, reducing sudden pressure changes that can create small blobs or bumps at the seam. For smooth curved surfaces, scarf seams provide an advanced technique for blending seam transitions. Instead of stopping and starting extrusion at a single point, the seam gradually overlaps the wall, making the transition much harder to notice. Different seam strategies work best, depending on the geometry of the model. Seams are unavoidable in most prints, but with the right placement strategy and a few advanced settings, you can control where they appear and how visible they become. Instead of fighting seams, you simply guide them into places where they quietly disappear. And that's the essence of seam control. Happy printing!